Today's guest is Sylvia True. Sylvia is a high school chemistry teacher and the author of the book Where Madness Lies, a story about hope and redemption and how one woman who nearly lost everything in order to save future generations. Sylvia, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you giving me a little bit of your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I believe your book has some paranormal undertones. So, can you tell us about your beliefs of the paranormal and how it relates to your book?
Sure. So the book is basically it's historical fiction in that it takes place, at least one part of it takes place in 1934, sort of pre-Nazi or Nazi Germany. And also it takes place, it's like a dual timeline in the 1980s. And in the 1980s, there's a character, the main character is in a mental hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, called McLean. And when she's there, she meets a friend, and it becomes sort of an important friend who has visions of spirits, basically. And the reason this woman, with the woman who sees spirits, her name is Cece, the reason she was put in a mental hospital was because she was living in a group home and she knew that the group home was going to burn down. And so she tried to warn everybody. And of course, then it happened. And then they believed she started it. Hmm. And the importance of her character there are a number of reasons her character is important in the book. And one of them is she pushes sort of at the boundaries of the protagonist, the main character, whose name is Inga, and it pushes against her belief system and it makes her open up a little bit. And for me, the whole book really is a trajectory of openness, like becoming open. And, in the end, Inga also has a vision of her sister who died in Nazi Germany. And will the reader think, well, it's maybe because she had a fever, or is she really, seeing somebody coming over from the other side? And that's up to the reader to decide. But for me, it was an important element. It gave depth to the book, but it also is very important to me in my life to have that openness to the paranormal. And I've learned so much from it. And I've had my own journeys with the paranormal. And, I'm a chemistry teacher, and I come from this long line of scientists who would just cringe at this, right? But so I've sort of investigated sort of scientifically. I mean, but I've done a lot. My eldest daughter calls me the medium hunter. But it's been a really interesting, exciting journey. And I feel like the book is, the major theme of the book is one of, people getting towards this openness and understanding and empathy so that they can finally really understand each other and love each other, which they couldn't do initially. There were too many walls. And, that openness also applies to me in my life and my daughter's life. And it's being curious, really. It's being curious what is out there. And because I'm so curious and I've had, I don't know, something sort of drop in my path that I've been able to find out about these things. And I find it fascinating.
Can you give me some examples of your paranormal experiences?
Sure. So I am not, as much as I want to be, really a psychic or a medium. I mean, I have had dreams with premonitions in them. I think many people have. I've had dreams where I believe I have visits from, my mother and my grandmother, but more of my experiences come from, visiting psychics and mediums. And I'll start with so after I had some, really deep struggles in my mid-20s, and I was very depressed and very anxious, and I didn't know what it meant. I was ashamed of it in my family because of where my family's roots were. You had to be perfect. I know a lot of families feel that way. And I knew I was sort of on a tightrope or ready to fall off, and I couldn't really manage well anymore. And so I decided, really smartly, not really smartly, I was like, well, what's a cure for, like, how do I get out of feeling this way? I decided to have a child, a baby. Well, babies, they don't cure depression.
Yeah.
So I ended up in a mental hospital, which is partly, which is also part of the book, right? And after I got well, thank God. It was, honestly the best educational journey of my life, which is why I also like to speak about it, because I teach students and I want, this openness about mental illness and about the paranormal. Like I want to tell them what I've learned and what I know. Anyway, so after I came out of the mental hospital, I was so much better, and I finally had a stronger sense of self, and I could finally be curious. And, it was like I was awake in the world for the first time. And I met a friend, and this friend said, his mother was a psychic. And I was like, yeah, right. No, we don't believe in that in my family. That's just crazy stuff. But he told me some stories, and I was like, all right, well, that's kind of interesting. So I had a tiny, tiny bit of openness, right? Enough to get me started. So I was like, okay, I'll go see your mom. So his mom was a psychic. She died about a year ago. Her name was Sophie. And I remember the first reading, I was blown away. Now, she didn't read tarot cards. She read regular cards, which we call playing cards, but I don't know if you probably know this. Playing cards were originally designed for fortune telling and for psychic readings. And she was my guide for 30 years. I mean, the things she told me were the details, and I'll give you an example in a second, were just amazing to me. And at that time, I didn't believe in, it's funny. It's funny when I look back, because I was like, okay, now I'm sitting with a psychic, and I know she knows things that I certainly haven't told my friend, that there's no way she could know. And she's predicting things, in the future that are very specific and keep happening, So I'm like, okay, I'll believe in psychics. But I was like, I'm not going to believe in things like past lives or mediums. And then she told me, when my mother was dying many years ago, she told me that my mother's parents would be visiting my mother. And that was very important, because my mother at times wouldn't see her parents, and she would get very frightened. And I needed to be there to remind, and comfort my mother and tell her that they were still waiting there, and they would be there when she, was ready to cross. And of course, all of that happened. And then I was like, oh, all right, maybe mediums, maybe there's something to it. So then I was like, I, investigated that. And of course, there are some great mediums, and there are some frauds. Unfortunately, I bumped into those along the way too, which is an interesting part of the story. But, I began to learn. And then, of course, the past life stuff. I mean, there's the whole University of Virginia, all their studies, which are fabulous. And this guy named Jim Tucker, and, in other societies and other places, past lives is not a big deal. I mean, there's a lot, I think we're more open to it now in this society, but certainly there's still a lot of like, oh, that's woo-woo stuff. You sound crazy. But there's just an enormous amount of research in these things that is very compelling. And, if you read it and you start doing the research and you start reading these stories like over and over again, and in nursing homes, and hospice, so, they'll all tell you stories of people being visited by their dead relatives, especially when they're about to cross. So anyway, I gradually, I was like, okay, it's not just psychics, it's mediums, it's past lives. And, I sort of opened up my mind to all of it. And it's just been, it's been a fascinating journey. And I don't know, I want to share that journey as well, which I'm working on my next book, which is about that, just because, I was a huge skeptic, and I think most people who start in this area, start learning about it are because they're curious, but they're skeptical. And I think that's healthy. I mean, I think you have to be. You have to go in with an open mind for sure, but you have to be like, let me see. You can't just believe everything. Anyway,
Mhm.
so one of many, many stories, but one of my favorite Sophie stories is my daughter. This was a few years ago. She was pregnant with her first child, and she had just had a miscarriage. So that she was nervous, obviously. I mean, this was her first child, and she had a miscarriage, so it's scary. And on New Year's Eve, she had an appointment with, she had an ultrasound appointment, and the technician said something to her that my daughter sort of misunderstood, and it didn't sound good. And my daughter was in Boston. I happened to be in Chicago visiting my dad at the time. My daughter called me and she could not speak. I mean, she was absolutely hysterical. Like she said, eventually she got out the words that the technician said something like there was an artery in the baby's brain. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense, but I'm trying to comfort my daughter and trying to figure out, and then I'm getting scared and oh my God, this is terrible. Now, there are a lot of doctors in my family, including radiologists. I comfort my daughter to some degree. I get off the phone. I don't call any of the doctors in my family. I call my psychic Sophie
Mm.
because that's what I learned to do, right?
Mm.
I mean, so I call Sophie and she's like, "All right, well, what do you want me to do?" Sophie was just such a character and a chain smoker and a coffee drinker, and I was like, "Just read some cards for me." So she was like, "The baby's fine. This is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." I'm like, "Yeah, but they said something." She was like, "No, the baby's fine." But she said, "Erica can't have for 2 weeks." And I was like,
Mm.
I can't tell that to Erica. But, I mean, as close as we are, I still felt like, yeah, that was a little much. And she's like, yeah, something hasn't moved yet. In 2 weeks, it will be fine. But you need to tell her she can't have for 2 weeks. And the baby's absolutely fine. So I felt like better. But you know, at least I was calmer so I could be calmer with Erica. So in a few days later, Erica had an appointment with her doctor, and the doctor was like, the baby's absolutely fine.
Mm.
The technician had said there was an artifact. And artifacts turn up in sonograms. They have nothing to do with the baby or with
Mhm.
what you're looking at. They're just like some disturbance, say, in the sound waves, right? But he said, listen, your placenta hasn't moved yet. It's still really low lying. And if you decide, which is totally fine, you won't harm the baby, you will spot or bleed. And because you're nervous and tense, you'll probably freak out. And if you do, that's fine. I'll give you another ultrasound. And of course, had to get another ultrasound. But it was like Sophie over and over again would have those kind of specific details. And, you know, after after having so many experiences, I mean, for me, I guess I was a slow learner and I needed a lot. But after all these experiences, it was amazing. It's just been an amazing journey to think like, wow, there's so much out there we don't know that we don't understand. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. Like, there's just, you know, this endless, I don't know, this endless other world.
So, would you say in your book you would kind of be the character that was the one that was slowly becoming open to the paranormal?
Yes, absolutely. It so the book really it's a fictionalized version, but it's based on sort of what happened in my family and especially my family in Nazi Germany. So it was my character, but to a larger extent in the book, it was more important for my grandmother's character. And the reason was because what happened to her in Germany, she was in Germany in the 30s. She was sort of a wealthy aristocratic woman. Her sister was mentally ill. She did everything she could for her sister. She researched, she looked for new treatments. They brought her to the best doctors. But at the time, in 1933, the Germans came up with their sterilization law. And then that eventually led to their euthanasia law. And what happened to my grandmother is she tried everything, and she ended up having to flee Germany and leave her sister in Germany. My grandmother went to Switzerland without her sister, without her husband, without her money, and she became very closed off. I think that she wanted to really leave that whole life and the trauma behind. I mean, it was the way that she coped with it. And in the end, she became very controlling too, like little things, like every clock in her house had to go off at exactly the same time every day. And like she checked those clocks obsessively. I mean, she's a brilliant woman, but she was very, in the box and became really pretty rigid. And she was rigid with us too, her grandchildren. There was like you had to, do all these check marks and follow all these rules, and you could never, obviously, you could never talk about the past or ask about the past. And you could never show any weakness, right? Especially any mental weakness. Pull up your socks, pull yourself together, all of that. Like, I know a lot of families have that. And then what happened when I got ill and went into a mental hospital, I remember like the doctors all asked. So like the first thing they would ask would be, is there any mental illness in your family? And I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, and I was so ashamed. I'm the only one. Everybody's perfect but me. And that's what I believed. And then my grandmother came to the States and slowly revealed her story and what had happened to her sister, which was hugely tragic and traumatic. And so she was the one that, I mean, both characters in the book sort of have to become more open to each other. Like they each have ideas of the other, sort of prejudgments, right, of the other. And, but especially the grandmother has to like begin to open up and accept her life. And in doing that, she also has to be open to others, other sorts of mental illnesses, and especially this other character's visions, and I think, like I said before, I mean, the whole trajectory of the book is one towards an openness and an understanding of other. If that made any sense.
Do you think there's an ambiguity between mental health and the paranormal?
Well, I think there can be, and it's really interesting, and especially when you look at, not especially, but I look at other societies, right? When, and again, every individual is different. Just let me start by putting that out there. I'm not going to say like anybody who has psychosis is, actually seeing spirits. There's no way I would say that. That would be completely idiotic. But, in other societies, when somebody does have a psychotic event, it's often people look at it and think, is spirit talking to them, basically. And a lot of places do believe that, and a lot of societies do believe that. I think here we don't, and that's fine. But I do think, like with the character who ended up going to McLean, I do think some people end up, being hospitalized who might hear voices and have visions, and we are becoming a little bit more open to the possibility that those are paranormal, things in their lives, but I think we still have a ways to go to accept it. I mean, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are like, yeah, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. But it's not always crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things out there that are unexplainable. There's a book about all these anomalies in archaeology. I think it's called Forbidden Archaeology. And there's all these anomalies contradicts archaeology. Like, for example, there's a diamond mine in Africa, and somewhere down in the mine, someone found something in the wall that was carved in the wall. So that means it's not by nature. So that means somebody left it there millions of years ago. Or I think NDEs are becoming more popular, and recently there's a doctor, a neurologist who had one, and he knows so much about the brain, and he knows that you're not getting any thoughts. It's not functioning, but he was astrally traveling and doing all this stuff.
Well, those are, there's a pretty recent book about it. near-death experiences by a cardiologist, and that one is fascinating because they can keep you alive longer, basically, in colder temperatures, or people can be dead for longer in colder temperatures. They are getting more and more of these, and that's absolutely fascinating book. And I know that, I mean, people, so I'm the head of the science department, right? Which we've renamed the Science, Technology, and Paranormal Studies Department.
Yeah.
We don't technically teach our students paranormal studies, but we have, like, I've been fortunate enough to work with these wonderful colleagues who were first like, yeah, right, no, that we're science people, we don't believe in that. And over the years, we're all reading about it now, and we're all like digging into it. And one of my colleagues actually went to Ireland to visit a medium with me. So, we've certainly opened up to all of that stuff, which is great, and I think it's really important just to be curious. Like, that's all I want my students, like, in life, just be curious, go and find out what there is to find out,
Right. Technology that we understand is no different than magic.
Yeah, interesting.
Right. I mean, I guess
I have to wrap my brain around that.
My son was telling me there's an island off of India where they're still like they were thousands of years ago, and they're still, there's no other human contact. So if you showed up there with a lighter or something and fire, and that might be considered magic.
Right.
Is it true that your grandfather was the doctor to Anne Frank's family?
Yes. So both my parents fled from Germany. My mother's side, the one with the grandmother who had to take care of her mentally ill sister, they fled to Switzerland. And my father's side, they fled to England. And my father was the doctor of Anne Frank and her family in Germany before the Frank family fled to Amsterdam. And my grandfather was just this wonderfully kind human being who absolutely did not believe that people were capable of what obviously people are capable of. And he literally had to be pushed onto a train by his cousin because he didn't want to leave Germany, and he just absolutely couldn't imagine anything terrible was coming. And of course it was. And thankfully he got out. The Nazis stripped him of his degree, and he had to get another medical degree in Scotland, and then he practiced in England. But yeah, he was a really kind human being. And it's funny because I'm sort of like that too. I just, you don't want to believe, like, I mean, even this crazy stuff that's happening in this country with politics, which I don't want to get into, but like, all right, I get it that people are angry, but the rage that some people have that would lead to, like, I don't know, murder. It's crazy. And you don't want to believe people would ever get that crazy, but they do.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he was the doctor of Anne Frank, and he did not believe people could get that crazy, and they did.
Would you say that you're a religious person?
That's a great question. I would say that I'm a very religious person because of spirituality, but I am not religious in terms of an organized religion anymore. You know what I mean? Like, no.
Or did you?
But I have a lot of faith, and I'm open to all religions, but I wouldn't join one particular one.
So were you raised with that background?
So it's really interesting. I was raised, my mother, so both my parents fled from Germany. They were Jewish by, I guess, culture, really. They weren't, they were of the sort of the aristocratic German Jews that were very assimilated into German culture. They didn't practice any religion, really, neither side. But they considered themselves Jewish. My father, who became a theoretical nuclear physicist, considered himself to be an atheist. Even at the very end of his life, when he had visits from relatives who had died, he was absolutely an atheist. My mother would drop us off at a Lutheran church when we were young. She wouldn't go in because she didn't believe in Jesus, because she was basically Jewish. But she wanted us to be, I don't know, she didn't want us to be Lutheran. She wanted us to be able to pass, right? So we could be Jewish in front of Jewish people and Christian in front of Christian people. And I didn't realize how like kind of crazy that was. Like, okay, I guess we'll be whatever we need to be, which when you look back and when I finally understood all the history and it was shared with me, which, you know, that took a lot of courage for my mother and grandmother to sort of open up about all of this, you know, again, because it was all about hiding and shame and fear and you know, you look perfect. But yeah, so it was weird. I was like sort of a Lutheran atheist Jew. That was my religion. And then then just became a spiritualist. Like I gave all that other stuff up.
Do you think that mental health is something that we inherit, or do you think it's something that's learned?
Such a great question. When I went to school, which was even before you, I know. Uh, when I went to college, you know, we took, you know, the general thinking was 80% of who you are is it's environmental. You get from the environment, 20% from genetics. And I think we know now that it's, I'm gonna throw out 50-50. I think it's probably even more genetic than that, but nobody has an exact number, obviously, because both factors play in. But if I look certainly at the history in my family, there's a pretty strong history of depression and anxiety, and certainly, you know, my daughter's also inherited it. And the good thing about the journey that I went on, the, you know, both the mental health and the spiritual journey, was that when I noticed it with my daughters, my eldest daughter sort of had more of the depressive side, and my younger daughter had more of the anxiety panicked side. But when I noticed it with my elder daughter, you know, there was no shame that there had been in my family. And I took her to, you know, a psychiatrist and a therapist and a psychic. Obviously, like, you know, I was going to attack it from all angles. So, you know, they're pretty open about it. So, yeah, I do think there's a huge genetic factor in my family, and they know that now. I mean, you know, doctors, psychiatrists, you know, that's obviously the first question they ask for a reason, you know, like it's pretty clear it's genetic. But environment plays a huge factor, you know, how you're raised absolutely affects it. So, you know, it's both. But I think in my family, genetics is a huge factor for how what some of us got.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess I kind of lean more towards behavior. I guess I feel like, you know, one person can keep learning from a parent, from a parent, from a parent. But I haven't done the research, and I don't know what there's research out there is, but it would be very fascinating to have a child of, you know, mentally ill parents and then have different parents raise the child.
Right.
And that would be really
right.
fascinating.
And, you know,
See
I
what
mean,
would
you
happen.
can't ever get a perfectly controlled study.
Mm-hmm.
There was that great movie, it was like 2 years ago, about the triplets. I'm sort of getting way off here, but there was a movie about identical triplets, and they were separated at birth and given to different parents. And it was almost done, and there was this really unethical thread that it was sort of done for research purposes. It happened in New York, and the triplets ended up finding each other. And, you know, it was hard to untangle. Like, there was some mental illness, absolutely, in that family, and how much was because of the parents or the genetics. It's, you know, to tease it out perfectly is almost impossible. I mean, you can't have a perfectly controlled study, but it is interesting. And, you know, if you do look into the research, there more and more does point to there are definitely genetic factors. I mean, that's true of even of alcoholism. You know, people believe. And of course, you could have nobody in your family be an alcoholic and you can become an alcoholic. So, you know,
Right. Yeah.
there's no like guarantee either way.
I'm going to pick your brain both scientifically here and spiritually, since you have your friend Sophie, right?
Sophie, yes.
Right. Kind of seems like you believe a little bit in past lives and stuff. So, do you think these bodies create consciousness, or is consciousness outside of the body? Because I think science will tell you they still don't know exactly what consciousness is.
Right. But I think more and more people are believing that your consciousness lives on when you die,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, it, for me, okay, so you know, I remember one reading I had with this absolutely amazing woman. It was she was a psychic astrologer, and again, she I was like, oh, I don't know if I believe in that. Again, it was always like, oh, I believe in the psychics, I believe in the mediums, but I don't know if I would believe in a psychic astrologer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember talking to her, and I remember most of all, like loving her voice. And she talked a lot about my past lives and about the contracts I made. And I recorded it and then I put it aside for actually a number of years, and only recently did I pick it up. Because I was doing some writing, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to listen to this woman because I liked her voice, but I didn't think anything she said was correct, right? And everything she said obviously was correct.
Hmm.
And she had said to me, I was at that time, it wasn't that long ago, but I was married to my second husband, and she said, you're going to have a third major relationship slash marriage. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. There's absolutely no way. I wasn't in love with my second husband, but we had like, yeah, we had found this like kind of nice, placid, flat existence. I did what I wanted, he did what he wanted. We took care of the grandchildren together. It was totally fine. I was like, there's no way. And she was like, no, no, you don't understand. You made a contract before you came here. And I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't. And I have this on tape, me arguing with her. And she's like, listen, some things are definitely free will. You have choice. You have free will. But some things you made before you came here. And this is one of them. You can't make it happen and you can't not make it happen. So just put it out of your mind and it's going to happen. And of course, it happened exactly how she said. And then she also went on to talk about my eldest daughter, and sort of my eldest daughter just had her third child, and she had some trouble again. I know I keep talking about babies and with my
Mm-hmm.
eldest daughter, but before this third child was born, there were some troubles. And this woman said she needs to wait till 2020. If she waits till 2020, she'll have no problem. If she has to, she tries it before then, there's going to be all kinds of problems.
Hmm.
And of course, there were problems. And in 2020, it was totally smooth, and Erica had her third child. But the way this woman talked about these contracts we make, and, I don't know, the way she knew, like, she just knew these things. It was fascinating. And I absolutely didn't believe her. And to have that, and then to by chance, and it's probably not by chance, who knows what spirit made me like click that button and say, today I'm going to listen to this recording that I hadn't thought about for years, and to hear her talk about the reason that I, needed to now be in this other new relationship was because I made this contract, I needed to be in a relationship where I actually found balance. And I hadn't had a balanced relationship. And that's what I needed. And that was the contract I made before I came here.
Mm.
And after listening to her now, I believe it.
Wow.
Can I prove it? No.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty compelling to listen to, and to listen to me argue with her. Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting to hear that.
Yeah. So, those stories are, I don't know, they just make you think. And again, it's all about this, this position of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not, like, how can you hear these kind of stories? I mean, you hear them every day, right? And not be like wildly curious about all this. You just
Mm-hmm.
want to read more and find out more and listen to more.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about ghosts and UFOs and other stuff?
Um, well, I definitely believe in ghosts.
Mm.
And it was really funny the other day. My nephew, um, who's a young man, there's a new show on Netflix. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Surviving Death,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it sort of covers all what.
I was going to say, yes, one of the people has
So,
been one of my guests.
oh, which one?
I think his name's Jose Hernandez. And I'm pretty sure I have
Okay,
it. I'm
is
pretty
he
sure
one of the ones that?
he's an engineer. Now he's a painter.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
I know exactly who he is.
Right.
Okay, yeah, he was great. I loved him. But anyway, my nephew texted me about it and was like, "Did you see this?" And I was like, "Not only did I see it, like I know literally everyone. I've either seen them as a client, or I've been to a conference with them. Unfortunately or fortunately, like I know all of this.
Wow.
You know, and yeah, I mean, it was weird watching it just because." Just all the different, things. Again, that's been one of my journeys, aside from teaching and whatever else, writing. I've been on this journey and I've met everybody and been to all these different mediums that they showed in the show. But I don't know, sort of a little off track here. My nephew, when he was about 4 or 5, we went to a haunted house, and it was in Newport, Rhode Island, and he was paying no attention. He, of course, why I don't even know why I took him on the tour, but I thought it would be fun, and he was a little too young for it. And the last room we were in was this big, like, a big hall, right? And my nephew was running around not paying any attention, and the woman said that there was a prince who had died, supposedly been died. Um, like in flames on one of these chairs, and that people, if they put their hand like through the air and went down like that, they sometimes felt a burning sensation. And I thought it was interesting, and everybody left and my nephew was still playing around, running around, and I went over to the chair and put my hand down. Of course I didn't feel anything, and my nephew was watching me, and he did it, and as soon as his hand got like partway through, he like yanked it out, like it obviously hurt. And I was like, well, that's weird. Was he paying attention? And I assumed, well, he must have been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he did, I was like, can you do that again? And he did it again and again. It hurt. And, finally, I wanted to feel it, right? And, I made him do it a couple more times till he was crying because, I'm a great aunt, whatever. And he clearly felt it. Like he clearly had a sensation that I could not feel, and he didn't know what it was, and it was frightening. And of course, I was fascinated, and the poor kid was frightened. But so anyway, I know that again, that's not proof, and I know a lot of people, could say that's ridiculous. That's he heard it, and whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, I know so many people who have said, like, at the moment a parent or a grandparent dies, they will see that person like right before they die sitting on their bed, or hear them calling to them. If that's, if you want to call that a ghost or a spirit or whatever, they absolutely exist. I know very little about UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated, mostly because of my friend Gavin, who I think you know Gavin, right? Or
Yeah, he's the one, I believe. Gavin from the book company, right? Gavin
yeah.
Davies.
Anyway, Davies, yeah. So his last book was phenomenal, and I do want to learn more about that. I just don't know much. I haven't, that hasn't been something I've read a lot about yet.
Mm.
But the woman who wrote Surviving Death, which is the name of the Netflix series,
Mm-hmm.
Leslie Kean, her first book, which was great, was on UFOs. I don't know if you've read that.
Mm-mm.
And she does a lot of research. She's a really good writer and a well-known journalist.
Mm-hmm.
So done my research, but not in UFOs.
You should check out one of my podcasts, and I've done so many of these that I usually don't, get emotionally involved or anything, but I had one that left me kind of spooked out for the evening after talking to the man. If you scroll through my podcast, there's a guy that had an alien encounter in the 70s in a park. Fast forward, 30 years later, he was a runner and had knee pain. And he decided to get an x-ray of his knee, and there was this crazy alien implant inside of his knee that looks like a computer chip with wires.
Wow.
And the guy is a very credible guy, too. He used to be the Assistant State Attorney General of Vermont. So, yeah, I mean, there's some stories out there when you hear that, it's very credible. And I was just like, whoa, why would someone make up a story like that? He showed me the x-rays. You can see the x-rays on the podcast. Right. And he said that he didn't come out with his book until after he retired because he knew that he was going to be shunned in those legal circles, which he was or is.
I know. It is interesting that there are people who just, I think I said at the beginning, only a closed mind is certain, right? Mm-hmm. That they're just absolutely certain that this is wrong, you're crazy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, look into it a little. Mm-hmm. Like, like I said, there's just masses of data for this. At the University of Vermont, like they've done so much, doctors and scientists have done so much work on this, and read a little bit about it. It's always interesting to me. It's a little, but I mean, people believed the world was flat, and mm-hmm. If you didn't believe that, you were crazy.
Some people still believe it. The flat earthers. It was funny that
that's true.
One of my guests is an artist, and I need to put it up because we always used to joke that we need to make this into a flat Earth behind me, just for the flat earthers.
Oh yeah.
And he made one, and
that would be good.
I need to put it up. So, how many books have you written?
So this is my second published book.
Okay.
The first one was also fiction. Mm-hmm. Sort of the same, completely different book, but the same idea of, these characters going through different kinds of trauma and, needing to sort of release their shame, basically. Again, there's this whole theme and thread of fear and shame and needing to sort of open up about that in order to, really have really loving relationships.
How did you get into being an author in the first place?
That's a great question. How did I? I think I didn't write when I'm not like a typical author who was like, oh, I've been writing stories since I was 2. No. In fact, I never wrote until I went to a mental hospital. And then I started doing journaling. So that was probably the very beginning of it. And then I really started reading a lot more fiction, which I hadn't done in my youth. And I was really interested in the whole process and the creation of it. Like, it is fun to create characters. And for me, the writing process itself is sort of really liberating because you don't know, or I don't know. I mean, every writer's different, right? But I don't know when I start somewhere where it's going to go at all. Like, I don't have a plan in my head. I don't have an outline. I have a general idea of a story for sure. And I mean, this last book, I knew the general storyline, but so many of the details and the characters, I also did a lot of research for this one in the historical part, but, as far as the characters and the dialogue and all that, that's, that just comes as I do it. And that's really, it's fun, it's a great hobby.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I think any kind of hobby where you're creating something is awesome, whether it's writing music, writing novels, painting, whatever. So both of these books, I would say, are kind of loosely based on some of your life experiences, right?
Yes, the second one much more than the first one, but yes.
And is the third? And I think you said the third one that you're working on is also based on you.
So the third one will, which I don't know because again, I'm not there. I've done a rough draft, a first draft. The third one I don't even think will be fiction at all. It'll be mostly about the journeys with sort of like a mix of my father's death with, sort of mostly my experiences actually with Sophie, who also died recently. But my other, sort of paranormal spiritual journeys and some of the unfortunate like run-ins I've had with frauds, which in a way, in a weird way, I don't know, and I don't quite know how to explain this, but the frauds, which a lot of people would be like, well, they're all frauds. Well, the frauds almost legitimize the real ones to me, because it's like if you see the fraud and you know what that feels like, and then you have these other experiences where clearly the person didn't cheat or can't know. I mean, it's sort of an interesting juxtaposition.
Are you pretty quick at determining whether a psychic is a fraud or not?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I've become better at it. Unfortunately, it's not something believe me, it's not something I wanted to do at all.
Mm.
One guy who's huge, and I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to be sued, but so I remember with him, he's very expensive, and I did have a gut feeling about him, and I had signed up for something called the Spirit Circle, and a Spirit Circle with him was like 8 people, and you each paid $500 just for the Spirit Circle, right? And you get a reading from him. You're promised basically a reading. And I thought, I don't know, I had read a couple reviews, and I just felt like, I don't know, I don't know, I just didn't feel good. So I said to one of my best friends, I'm like, you go in my place, right? You don't have to say your name, just go to the Spirit Circle. And if he starts talking about, your mother being Swiss national champion skater, the Nazis, whatever, he's looked me up, right? So he had my name, he didn't have my friend's name. So my friend went into the Spirit Circle, and he didn't ask for any names, and everybody sat there, and he started talking about, he was getting these, impressions of this woman who fled from Switzerland, who fled from Germany and went to Switzerland, and, fled from the Nazis. And it was clear, like, he researched me and he fed it right to my friend,
Mm.
It was sort of an easy one. And I called him on it. I wrote to him, and
Mm.
he was furious. Like it was the weirdest phone call because I was actually in class teaching, and my friend was a teacher too. And, she came into my room. It was her prep. I was teaching this class, but we always talk. And, she read the letter I had just wrote to him, and then my phone rang, and it was like a, unknown caller or private or whatever. And I knew it was him, and it was him. And so I put him on speakerphone so all my students could listen. Now, this is a great chemistry class, right? Like, Can
Wow.
you imagine how engaged these kids are? So here are their 2 chemistry teachers who are like doing a sting operation on a medium,
Uh-huh.
who I write to the medium, and the medium calls me in the middle of the class. And of course, I answer my phone, and he put it on speakerphone so they can all hear it. I'm like, just be quiet. And he was so nasty. He was like, and I told him the truth. I said, listen, I had a feeling my friend went instead of me, and you gave her all my mother's information. And he was like, do you know what kind of evil person you are?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of evil person would do something like that? I was like, I don't think it was evil. Like, she didn't lie to you. She didn't give you my name. She didn't give you any name. Like, nobody lied. But he just was like, all this negative karma is going to come back. And I was like, okay.
So he didn't.
I don't think so.
He sounds like more of attacking you than really explaining what happened.
Oh, yeah. He was furious.
Hmm.
He didn't want me to write about it. obviously.
Wow.
I mean,
Do you,
anyway, it was a great experience for my students. It was probably their favorite chemistry class.
yeah, of course. Can you give us tips on how to spot a fraud?
So I think one of the things for me, or what I learned, sadly, another one that was pretty significant, and I initially thought she was fantastic. And, I referred her to a bunch of my friends. And again, I tape recorded them. My daughters tape recorded them. My friends ended up tape recording them. And, at first she just seemed so phenomenal, and she knew all these details. Like, she knew all my siblings' names, and she knew all the different locations. My father, like, he fled from Germany, went to England, he went from England to Chicago. I was like, whoa, oh my God, she's amazing. And it didn't occur to me then that she was just literally reading from my mother's obituary. I mean, she just like literally went down the obituary. And she did that for a number of other people as well, which, again, I'm not going to publish it, but we have on recording. It's like, no, it's pretty obvious. So it's like, if they're that crazily specific,
Mhm.
it's, it's not, and I know everybody's like, yeah, you can Google anything. I think that obituaries are a common way they cheat,
Hmm.
and it happened to me a couple times. And, I just called them on it. I'm like, one of them said to me, oh, yeah, that's just how spirit comes to me. It just downloads all the information. I'm like, yeah, no, that's called the internet.
Mhm.
But whatever, you have your story. And maybe you're right. Maybe I'm wrong. And I'll find out when I die, and we'll all figure it all out. But,
Mhm.
and then sometimes I find, like, I don't necessarily know that some of them that aren't good, they're not necessarily cheating, but you can kind of feel like, I have this sort of this mother energy. It could be a mother or a grandmother or an aunt. And then you're like, okay, well, who doesn't have a mother or grandmother or aunt?
Mhm.
And then if you say no to all those, it's like maybe a great grandmother. And then you're like, yeah, no. But, so that there's too much fishing,
Yeah.
and, I feel like there were, what, 3 of you? And then I would say, no, there were actually 4 of us. And they say, oh, no, right. That's what I meant. Like,
Mhm.
there are 3 of you plus you. And you're like, no, that's not,
Right.
I mean, I've sadly, like, my daughter calls me the medium hunter. I've like done this enough to like know these, like, and some of them, those people aren't necessarily cheating, and maybe they have some kind of gifts, but maybe they're just not connecting with you. I'm not, the last thing, trust me, the last thing I want to do is ever feel like anybody's cheating, or
Mhm.
I mean, I want honest readings, but sometimes you don't get them.
Right. Yeah. And you don't want to have to go and accuse people of cheating.
Oh my God, no. But I'm not afraid to say, I think, I'm never asked for my money back. I was like, that's not what this is about. So for me, it's like, I'm just telling you, like, this is what it felt like for me. And and people give, interestingly, people have given, without me ever asking, have given me, refunds. And I say right up front, that's not what I'm looking for. I mean, I just, I was hoping for, a more genuine experience. And I've had many great experiences,
Mhm.
by the way. So
Mhm.
it's all interesting,
Your book is out, right?
right?
And
Just came out.
Where Madness Lies, it's been out. You can get it on Amazon and maybe all the other usual book
Anywhere.
places.
Yep. Barnes and Noble, whatever bookstore, there, Google it, it'll come up with wherever, Kobo, all the normal book places.
Are you a private or public person? And what I mean about that is if people contact you on social media, do you respond?
Yeah, I'm super public. I share my story with everyone. And I love responding. I love conversation and discourse and talking about any of this. And, I'm throwing it out there, mental illness, like I said, I want people to talk about it. I don't want them to be ashamed about it.
Mhm.
I want my students to understand that, that's not something they need to be ashamed of, and they can get help, if they're struggling. And I think that's super important. And that's one of the reasons I'm very public about it.
Do you think that almost everybody on the planet has some form of mental illness, even if it's very mild?
I'm not my sister's a psychiatrist. She'd be the better one to answer. I would not. I mean, oh God, everybody has something, right? Like, how can you not? Like, do you have a little narcissism? Probably. Do you have a little, anxiety or depression? Some people have the blues, yeah. But I don't, labels are scary to me at times. I hate labeling. And yet on the other hand, labels can help you diagnose something or categorize something, so they can be helpful. But yeah, I don't know. Are we all crazy? Yeah, we're living in a crazy world right now, so that's going to make us all a little crazy.
Have you heard of the Ascension?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have thought that you would have heard about that. Some people.
What do you like?
I don't even know a lot about it, but some people I think believe it's already starting. Some people believe it already happened. Some people believe it's still going to happen. I think some people are saying UFOs are stopping it. But basically, humanity's going to kind of take a upward trajectory in spirituality at some point.
I've heard about that actually from a number of different mediums talk about that. I don't know. I haven't researched that, but I've definitely heard it, and people who I thought were really legitimate and good have definitely spoken about this upward spiritual movement. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I am. It's funny because I didn't know anything of it until I started having the guests. So I learned it from the guests, and I saw a little bit online. And
I'm going to look it up now. Now that you brought it up again, because it has been mentioned to me a few times. So I've definitely, I know a little bit from just what different mediums have told me, but I haven't looked into it deeply at all.
All right. Well, do you have any other projects that you're working on besides your next book that you want us to know about?
Not really. I'm just busy being a grandmother most of the time, which is my favorite project, spoiling grandchildren. I think that of all the things in my life, I think I do that best.
Well,
my son-in-law says to me sometimes, it is possible to come over without bringing the kids presents, right? And I'm like, do I have to do that? And he's like, well, could you try just once to come over without bringing them gifts? I'm like, no. I mean, I go and see them like 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah.
So I'm really good at that.
Yeah. They'll probably even ask him, is grandmother coming? When is she coming?
I know. So I'm pretty lucky. Yeah.
All right, Sylvia. Well, before we wrap it up here, can you give us one last message?
I'm going to say what I started with, which is only a closed mind is certain. So don't close your mind.
All right, I like that. And Sylvia, I wish you massive success with this book, with your next book, and with anything else you're going to be putting out.
All right. Thank you. Such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, and have a great evening.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.